Thank you. It's a hell of a crowd. Thank you, thank you. It is great to be here with you in Holland, Michigan, and I've got some good news. In 7 short days, we're going to make Donald J. Trump the next president of the United States. That's pretty fun. Now, I want to give, before we get started, some shout-outs here to some very special guests. And, of course, first of all, we're so thrilled that all of you are here to join us. I know that we had so many people that we've got an overflow room with about 500 folks, so I just want to say hello to them. Sorry you guys couldn't get in, but get out there and vote. Let's help us win. The next time we come back to Michigan, we'll do it in a bigger venue. I want to thank, first of all, we've got Congressman Brian Mast of Florida. Brian, where are you at? Where's Brian at? Brian's backstage. Give Brian a big round of applause. Thank you, Brian. There he is right there. All right, we got State Representative Matt Hall. Matt, where are you at? Thank you, Matt, for your leadership. Appreciate what you're doing. The great Michigan GOP, Pete, thank you so much, man. Diane, lovely to see you. We've got members of President Gerald Ford's family here. Say hello, the Ford family. Thank you, guys. Beautiful crew. And we've got, of course, the beautiful family. There's too many of them to name, but the beautiful family that owns this business and is hosting us today. Thank you all so much for having us. You're great people, and we're thrilled to be here. So, you know, I was thinking that I actually feel bad for Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota, and I'm probably the only person in this room who feels bad for Tim Walz because he's actually got, in a lot of ways, the hardest job in American politics. He's got to go around the country and try to pretend that Kamala Harris is fit to serve as president of these United States. And you think about it, what Governor Tim Walz has to do, and we should, I know we've got a lot of church-going folks in this room, and we love you. We're thrilled to have you. We ought to spare a prayer for Governor Tim Walz, because think about it. This guy's got to go around and pretend that Kamala Harris isn't the cause of the inflation and the affordability crisis affecting American families. He's got to go around and pretend that even though Kamala Harris said she was going to open the border, he's got to pretend that she somehow cares about border security. And he's got to pretend that the vice president who presided over the most chaotic situation in the world is somehow going to be a president of peace and prosperity. He's also got to pretend that Kamala Harris actually has ideas for how to govern the United States of America. I've actually got, in a lot of ways, I've got the easiest job in American politics, because all that I have to do is remind people that Donald J. Trump was the president of peace and the president of prosperity. I get to remind people that when Donald J. Trump was president, inflation was at 1.5%. That's pretty good. I get to remind people that when Donald Trump was president, we had the fastest rising take-home pay in a generation in the United States of America. And I get to remind the American people that when Donald J. Trump was president, the border was secure and our country was safe. Now, the thing about Kamala Harris, and I will, you didn't expect me to be bipartisan today, but here I am saying something nice about Governor Tim Walz and something nice about Kamala Harris. The thing that she does have going for her is that every time she does an interview, I think that we gain about 100,000 votes for the Trump ticket. And the reason is because Kamala, when she doesn't have a teleprompter in front of her, she actually sometimes, by mistake, will tell the truth. Because the entire narrative of Kamala Harris's campaign is that she has nothing to do with the policies of Joe Biden, even though she's the sitting vice president of the United States. The narrative of the Kamala campaign is that she had nothing to do with the rising inflation, even though she cast the deciding vote on trillions of dollars of new spending. Even though Kamala Harris came into office bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policies, she has got to somehow convince the American people that she had nothing to do with it, even though there's clips of her on TV saying that she wanted to undo Donald Trump's border policies. So that's the truth about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is more of the same, more of the broken border policies, more of the unaffordable groceries and unaffordable housing, more of the broken leadership. And I think that we ought to say to Kamala Harris, you are fired. Go back to San Francisco where you belong. We want a real president. Now, of course, we're going to do that in 7 days, but it's funny, Kamala Harris sometimes gives us a little bit of help along the way. And that's what's so interesting is, you know, the media says that she only does softball interviews, right? So she'll do an occasional interview with a tough journalist, like one or two, over the course of the whole campaign. But she only mostly does softball interviews. And I know we got a lot of baseball fans in the room. And the problem with a softball interview is you've still got to be able to hit a softball. And I don't know that Kamala Harris could hit a T-ball based on what we've seen from some of these interviews. Because, again, she is trying to run away in her scripted speeches as far away from the record of the last 4 years as possible. She's trying to pretend that she's the change candidate, even though we know she's the candidate of more of the same broken policies. And yet a couple weeks ago, she gave an interview on The View. And in that interview, she kind of admitted that she's been lying to the American people for the past 3 months. Now, you will never hear me complain about running for Vice President of the United States. It is the great honor of my life to stand here in this beautiful facility in front of all of you and to ask you to make me your next Vice President. That's an incredible thing, and we're thrilled about it. And I'm having fun. Thank you. I love you too. Ladies, beautiful. Thank you all. Well, look, here's the one complaint that I'll make is that sometimes, as an act of public service, I will watch Kamala Harris on programs like The View so that you don't have to. It's what I'm willing to do. This is a life of service that I've chosen. And a couple weeks ago, she gave an interview that I think really actually blew up her entire campaign. Because the interviewer said, what would you have done differently over the last 4 years? And Kamala Harris says, well, nothing comes to mind. Now think about this. She's been running away for the last 4 years, her entire campaign, but in one 15-minute segment, she said nothing comes to mind that she would do differently from Joe Biden. Now, I will say, in her defense, that could very well be the slogan of the Harris-Walz campaign. Harris-Walz, nothing comes to mind, because when she... But we know that when Kamala Harris says she's going to fix the border, and you actually ask her, well, how are you going to fix the border? She'll say, well, nothing comes to mind, right? We know that our fellow citizens are struggling to buy groceries, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to afford housing. What is Kamala Harris's answer to those problems? Nothing comes to mind. And this is true of nearly every problem we're confronting as a country, and we can laugh and we can have a good time. And by the way, I think that we're having a lot more fun on the Trump campaign than the Harris campaign is having right now. But we're also talking about some very deadly serious business, because unless we give the American people a leader who is fit to serve this great nation, I believe that the American dream is going to become more and more out of reach. And that's ultimately what this election is about. Let's just talk about a few issues here and how Kamala Harris has failed our citizens. Number one, we're, of course, in the great state of Michigan. one of the proudest automobile manufacturing places in the entire country, but even the entire world. And yet Kamala Harris came into office promising job-killing EV mandates and subsidizing rich people to buy electric vehicles that are made in China instead of supporting the great Michigan auto workers who build the best automobiles in the world. Now, I think that's a scandal. President Trump and I actually take a slightly different approach to the car issue. We think, number one, that we ought to make car loan payments tax deductible to empower Americans to pay their bills. But we also follow a very basic principle that this is the United States of America, and so you ought to be able to drive whatever automobile you want to, because we believe in the freedom to choose. We've already seen multiple automobile plants just in the last couple of years headquartered in this great state that have shed hundreds or even thousands of jobs. I believe Stellantis laid off about 2,500 workers. I believe Ford has laid off about 1,500 workers. The Michigan automobile manufacturing industry is suffering because we've got a leadership who looks out for Chinese-made EVs but doesn't look out for Michigan auto workers. And I make you a promise. When Donald J. Trump is back in the White House, Michigan auto workers will have a friend and a fighter in the Oval Office. We're going to make Michigan car making great again. You know, it's being here is fun, but there's a certain sadness when I talk to people because they recognize that financially they're worse off than they were 4 years ago. I think the excitement that we feel in this room is excitement in the knowledge, hope in the knowledge that we can do a lot better in the United States of America, but there are a lot of our fellow citizens out there who are struggling financially in a very big way. Now, I'm 40 years old. I actually turned 40 just a couple of months ago, right after I became the VP nominee, and I will tell you, I used to say all the time, especially right after my birthday, how angry I was that I had just turned 40. And then, you know, somebody who had just turned 60 or 70 would come up to me and tell me to shut the hell up, that I was lucky that I had just turned 40. So I took that line out of my speeches. But in 40 years, for the first time, we have our fellow citizens who are worse off financially than they were 4 years ago. And, you know, sometimes politicians can make this stuff more complicated than it needs to be. A very simple question, especially to the swing voters all over the state of Michigan, is, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And for most of us, the answer is no. So here's a very simple proposal. Rather than doubling down on the failed policies of Kamala Harris, let's go back to the strong leadership, the prosperous leadership of Donald J. Trump, and let's unleash. Let's unleash a golden age of prosperity, the likes of which this country hasn't seen. Let's make this country great again. Let's make life affordable again. And let's get back to some common sense leadership, the common sense leadership of Donald J. Trump. So for the swing voters at home, I just want to walk through a few of the ways in which things have gotten much worse for the common people of our country. 25% increase in grocery prices in the state of Michigan. The cost of living overall is up more than 20% in the state of Michigan. Inflation under Kamala Harris has cost the average Michigan family $29,000. And at the current pace, it's costing the average Michigan family over $1,000 a month. Think about this. You're paying more than $1,000 a month just to afford the basic necessities, the things that you could have afforded for much less when Donald J. Trump was president of the United States. Home prices in Michigan are 41% higher under Kamala Harris's leadership. And importantly, and this one really worries me because this suggests our fellow citizens are hurting, credit card delinquencies are up over 9% in this country. That means a lot of our fellow citizens cannot afford to pay their bills. So, for a lot of the folks at home, the people who are watching the clips, it's very, very simple. We have got two choices in this country. We have got the pathway of higher grocery prices, higher housing prices, a wide open southern border, and then we've got the Donald J. Trump pathway of peace, prosperity, and an affordable American dream. In 7 days, let's choose the pathway of peace and prosperity. You know, I want to tell you a little bit about my own background here, because I think it illustrates some of the frustrations that a lot of folks are feeling. You know, I was raised by my grandmother. My mother struggled with opioid addiction for a big chunk of my early life, and I'm proud of my mom because she's about to celebrate 10 years clean and sober, which is a great blessing for my family. Thank you. But I remember when I was a kid, and sometimes times were especially tight, and I remember sometimes my grandmother, I called her Mamaw. Mamaw would say, you know, we just don't have enough money, and it's a little too cold tonight. We're going to throw a few extra blankets on the bed. We're not going to turn on the heating tonight. And I know there are a lot of Michigan families, and I know it gets even colder in Michigan than it does in my home state of Ohio, a lot of Michigan families who are going to be worried about whether they can turn the heat on in the middle of a cold winter night. And I think that's a disgrace. We've got the richest and most prosperous country in the world. And right now, we've got a vice president who would rather buy oil and gas from tin pot dictators all over the world. I say we make energy more affordable for American citizens. We drill, baby, drill, and give everybody the right to turn on their heat in the middle of the night. You know, it's funny, when the media sometimes they'll ask Kamala Harris, they'll say, well, what is your exact plan to lower the price of groceries and housing and all the things that have gotten more expensive thanks to your policies? And Kamala will say, well, you know, I grew up in a middle-class family. Or they'll say, what is your plan to close down that southern border that you bragged about opening just 3.5 years ago? And she'll say, well, you know, I worked at McDonald's, and I made the hash browns, and I was very good at it. And by the way, I don't even know if I believe that anymore. I think that maybe President Trump has worked at McDonald's for longer than Kamala Harris has. But what does it say about Kamala Harris? And what does it say about the kind of vice president she has been and the kind of president she would be, that she cannot answer simple questions about what she plans to do as president of the United States? And one of the things that I think it says is that Kamala Harris is not so much a candidate as representative of a broken machine in American life. She doesn't so much want to be the president. She wants to just follow orders, I believe, from the same people who have broken our country over the past 20 years. Think about it. How can Kamala Harris, who is a member of the political party that has governed this country for the past 20 years, with the brief interruption of 4 years of Donald Trump's leadership, how is it possible for her to stand on a stage and blame Donald J. Trump for the very things that she has done? You do that when you don't have any ideas, and you do that when you have no idea what you want to do as president of the United States. And set to the side any policy disagreements that we have with Kamala Harris. I am terrified about having a person like that sit in a room with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping if she cannot answer friendly questions from the friendly American media. How can we possibly expect her to negotiate on our behalf in front of the world's worst people? We can't. And you know, the thing that she's done the worst at, of course, there are so many issues that we could talk through, so many issues where I think the American people agree with our common sense approach. I mean, for starters, why don't we just educate children in American schools and stop indoctrinating them? Why don't we ensure that every kid has a good education? When we've got $1.7, $1.8 trillion deficits every single year, why is it that Kamala Harris wants your tax money to fund sex changes for illegal immigrants? That's pretty crazy. So we could go through so many issues, so many areas where Kamala Harris has failed, but I think there's no issue where she's failed more significantly than what's going on at the American southern border. And we've got to remember, again, that she came into office bragging that she would undo Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and she did. She came into office saying that she would suspend deportations, and she did. She came into office saying that she would stop building the wall, and I've been to the border more than our illustrious border czar, and you will find pieces of that beautiful border wall just laying on the ground, rusting and collecting dirt because Kamala Harris refuses to do her job. Now, President Trump and I have a slightly different approach when it comes to border security. Our attitude is, if you came in this country illegally, pack your bags because in 3 months you're going back home. There are 425,000 illegal alien criminals in the United States of America today. That's 13,000 of them are murderers, and then, of course, a lot of other criminals beyond that. You know, that's more than twice the size of the United States Marine Corps, people who shouldn't be in this country who have committed violent crimes. We've got 85,000 children in Michigan public schools who are the children of illegal aliens, and, of course, we know that a lot of those students don't even speak English. Now, what happens to the quality of a Michigan school when you have thousands upon thousands of children who don't even speak English? We know what that means. The guidance counselors and everybody else have to distract resources from the children of American citizens to focus on the children of people who shouldn't be here. And that makes everybody's education worse off. We know that hospital wait times in the state of Michigan have skyrocketed because we've got illegal aliens at our emergency rooms getting health care and getting put in line in front of American citizens. And I don't begrudge, by the way, any illegal alien for wanting a better life, for wanting to have a good life in the United States of America. But number one, you've got to come through the proper channels and you've got to come in the right way. And number two, the interests of the American people. That is what the American president serves. We've got to have an American president who puts our citizens first, puts their interests first, and spares their compassion for the kids in the United States of America that don't have good health care, don't have good access to education because Kamala Harris won't do her job. Illegal immigration costs the state of Michigan. Now, I'm not talking about federal money because there's a lot of federal money between Medicare fraud, Social Security fraud going to illegal aliens, and certainly we know the housing and welfare benefits that illegal immigrants collect. Michigan is spending $1.1 billion per year to deal with the border crisis of Kamala Harris. And I think in so many ways this election is very simple. It's a very simple principle that when Donald Trump was president, things were going pretty well, and now that Kamala Harris is running the country, things are going pretty poorly. So I'd like you to think about it in this way. Kamala Harris, when we're talking about the border, Kamala Harris broke it, and Donald Trump will fix it. The cost of living is over 20% higher for Michigan families. On the economy, Kamala Harris broke it, and Donald Trump will fix it. We've got a record number of our people dying of fentanyl overdoses that was imported by the Mexican drug cartels. I think that we ought to use the U.S. military to go after those drug cartels and stop the flow of this poison into our country. But again, when it comes to record numbers of young Americans dying of overdoses, Kamala Harris broke it, and Donald J. Trump will fix it. That is what this election is all about. Now, look, you don't have to agree with me on everything. You don't have to agree with everything that Donald Trump, every policy viewpoint of me or President Trump. You don't have to agree with everything that we say. But I think most Americans, most fair-minded people would look at the past 4 years, compare it against the successful leadership of Donald Trump and say, look, Donald Trump built a great economy. He secured the border. He did so many good things. Kamala Harris broke it. Now let's put Donald Trump back in there to fix what Kamala Harris has broken. Now, I want to say just a couple more things before we turn it over to a few folks from the media to ask some questions, and then, of course, I'll answer them. One thing that tells me that Kamala Harris's campaign is going poorly is how she has decided to go after her fellow Americans down the stretch. And I'll tell you, when I was at Madison Square Garden a couple of days ago, it felt like a celebration of the United States of America. It was an incredible, incredible thing to watch. You know, my kids were there, my wife was there, my 7-year-old told an inappropriate joke to Donald J. Trump, which, luckily the president took it in stride. We had great singers, we had American business tycoons, and of course we had our favorite president. And it just felt like a lot of people were thrilled to be there to celebrate the United States of America, our history, and most importantly, what our future could hold if we fix the broken leadership. That's all that Madison Square Garden was about a couple years ago. Sorry, I mean a couple days ago. But here's what Kamala Harris and her team have decided to do over the last couple of days. They've decided to compare Donald Trump's rally in Madison Square Gardens to a literal Nazi rally almost 100 years ago in this country. They've done it. You can go watch the clips yourself. Even though I believe Bill Clinton, just a few short years ago, accepted the Democratic nomination in Madison Square Gardens when a bunch of people who just want to close down the border and get back to affordable prices gathered to celebrate the future of our country, they called us literal Nazis. That is the Kamala Harris strategy down the stretch. And I want to ask a couple of things. The first thing I want to ask is for us to not take the bait. And here's what I mean by this. I asked for this. Donald J. Trump, he asked for this. But our fellow citizens, whoever they're ultimately going to vote for, we love our fellow citizens and we want Trump to be president so that they can have a better life. I don't care that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz attack me, and I don't care that they criticize us for this policy view or that policy view, but I think it is disgraceful for a person who wants to lead this great nation to call half of her fellow citizens Nazis because she disagrees with their politics. At Madison Square Gardens, and I assume that Kamala Harris doesn't know that, at Madison Square Garden that night, there was a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor who is about as MAGA as it gets, and he was there to support Donald J. Trump. How dare Kamala Harris call that brave man a Nazi? How dare she attack the citizens of her own country for daring to tell her that she's done a bad job? How dare she call her citizens, her fellow citizens, racist for wanting to secure the southern border? How dare she call us fascists for wanting more affordable groceries for our children? Kamala Harris, if you want to look at the face of disloyalty to the United States of America, look in the mirror. Don't attack your fellow citizens for loving this country enough to fight for it. One final request I want to make, and Pete Hoekstra would be mad if I forgot this part. In some ways, it's the most important part, because as fun as this is, And importantly, as much as we've got important work to do, we cannot do that work unless we get Donald J. Trump and me and a lot of our other candidates over the finish line. So I want to make 3 requests of you. 3 requests. First of all, I want you to go to this website called swampthevoteusa.com. And I'll repeat it, swampthevoteusa.com. Check about where you can get a ballot, where you can vote early, check your polling location, and use every method that you can to get out there and vote. Whether that's before Election Day or on Election Day, we've got to bank as many votes as possible because we want to swamp the vote as much as possible. Make this thing, as President Trump says, too big to rig. And swampthevoteusa.com is where we get the information. The second request I want to make is for everybody, and I see a lot of you got your phones. Take out your phone and take a photo before we wrap. And again, we'll have a little bit of time because I'm going to take some questions from reporters and post on social media, send texts around, make some phone calls. Just talk about why you're voting for Donald J. Trump. Because as much as Kamala Harris and her allies in the corporate media, they're never going to tell the truth about this campaign. You know who can tell the truth? All of us. So let's get out there and tell that truth for the next 7 days. And the third request I'm going to make is that I want every single person in this beautiful facility, every single one of us, to get out there and vote 10 times. And here's what I mean. I mean vote 10 times the legal way. And the way to do that is to take yourself to the polls and then take 9 of your friends and family with you. Let's all commit to doing that because this state is within victory, but only if we get out there and work for it. So let me take a few questions from the reporters, and then I'll leave you all with a final thought. But I really appreciate y'all being here. And now, we'll do what Kamala Harris refuses to do, which is just take questions from the American media. Sir.
Yeah, Senator Vance, Sam Lanster from Fox 17, the local Fox affiliate here. This area of Allegan County is traditionally votes Republican, and when you were most recently here at the Berlin Raceway in Marne, that is also an area here that's traditionally Republican. Is that the strategy of your campaign, kind of in this final stretch here in this part of the state, to kind of energize, more target specifically, your voter base?
No, I think our strategy is we want as many people out there, just to put it very simply. This is going to be like a John Madden football commentary. You remember John Madden? He'd always say, well, the Bengals really need to score more points than the Eagles to win this game. It's like, all right, thanks, John. Our strategy is to get as many votes as possible from wherever we can get them. It's very simple, actually. And look, yes, we're in an area, obviously, with a lot of loyal Republicans, but we're also, I guarantee there are a lot of Democrats and independents in this room who are sick of the garbage and want to get back to common sense. So we're going to get everybody to the polls. But if you look at just where I've been in Michigan over the last couple of weeks, where President Trump has been in Michigan, I mean, I was in a couple of pretty blue or at least purple areas of Wisconsin yesterday. The president and I are going everywhere. We're going to the urban areas, we're going to the suburban areas, we're going to the rural areas because we think that every vote of every American citizen counts, and we just want people to have a better life. It's very simple. That's the message. The message of our campaign is that the American people could have such a better life if we just fix the broken leadership in Washington, D.C. Kamala Harris broke it. Donald J. Trump will fix it. That's why we got to win in 7 days. Thank you.
Next question. Thank you, Senator. Josh Albertus, WZZM 13. Our in-person statewide early voting period started over the weekend here in Michigan. It's the first one we've been required to have for a general election under the state constitution. At first, a few years ago, some early voting like absentee voting. Many in your party were skeptical of it, but now we've seen signs about mail-in early voting around the room and at other events on the trail. What do you think may have been the turning point have been for portions of your party in this year's campaign to embrace it? And what would you say to people who may still be skeptical about those systems?
Well, look, I understand the skepticism because I think a lot of Americans would rather have election day rather than election season. But as President Trump has said, it is what it is. And you can't have one campaign trying to take advantage of every opportunity to vote, that being the Kamala Harris campaign. If that's going to happen, then the President Trump campaign has got to take advantage of every opportunity to vote too. And that's all that's happened, is I think that, you don't have to agree with the particular change, but you've got to accept the rules as they're actually set for the game. And the rules for this game is that we need to bank as many votes before Election Day as we can. So get out there and vote early, vote often, and that's simply our message. Next question.
Hi, Senator Vance. This is Elizabeth Mitchell from the Daily Signal. Former President Trump has said that he would ban transgender procedures for minors without parental consent. Would the... Would the Trump-Vance administration consider banning sex changes for minors in all cases with or without parental consent?
Well, look, I think sex changes for minors, permanently altering either chemically or surgically the body of a young child, is crazy. I can't believe that we do this. I really can't. And I think it's so sad for these poor kids who, they're teenagers, they're adolescents, maybe some of them, in really bizarre cases are even preteens. We used to in this country recognize that adolescence was a tough time to grow up, that we try to encourage people to accept themselves. Now you have some very sick people who, when an adolescent is struggling with a problem, they say, no, don't accept yourself. Go and surgically alter yourself. I think that's an insane way to talk to our young people, and we ought to stop doing it. We'll do one more question.
Senator Vance, Rick Albin at Wood TV. Across the 7 battleground states, you and Donald Trump lead. But many of those states, at least 5 of those, are below single digits.
Sure.
3/10, 8/10 in the state of Michigan, 2/10. It's one of the closest races that I've seen in a long time covering presidential races. How concerned are you that those margins are too small and hard to defend?
I am extremely concerned that those margins are too small, which is why I'm here telling everybody to get out there and vote as much as you can. Get your friends and family to the polls. This is not, it raises a good point. I mean, knock on wood, because I'm a little superstitious here, but look, we are in a very, very good place in this race. I really do believe that Donald J. Trump is going to win the state of Michigan and become the next president of the United States. But it's not going to happen unless we work for it. And I do worry a little bit about my fellow Republicans. But again, we've got the Big Tent Common Sense Coalition. So when I say my fellow Republicans, I mean also the independents and Democrats who are voting for this ticket. We have got to keep working for it. We cannot get complacent here. We know the other side is going to try to pull every trick in the book to make Kamala Harris the next president of the United States. Now, that is nightmare fuel for me and my family, and I imagine for most everybody else in this room, so we've got to work hard at it. Now, Traditionally, of course, polling has always been very bad to Donald J. Trump. It's typically radically understated his support. But here's what I ask myself all the time. What if this is the one time the polls are overstating the support of Donald J. Trump? You don't want to be the person who could have been the difference between President Trump and President Kamala Harris and to have forgotten to vote. So get out there and vote. Let's do this thing. Don't leave it to chance. Because here's what it's ultimately at stake. And I want to remind you, as you're working hard over the next 7 days, and again, we've got plenty of room and plenty of space for people who want to volunteer, who want to phone bank, but the most important thing you can do is to get your friends and family who would vote the right way, make sure they actually get out there and get to the polls. Because a lot of folks, what we see right now is that Democrats are not getting their people who don't vote that often, those people are staying at home for the Democrats. The people who are going to vote for Donald Trump but don't always vote all the time, we got to make sure they get out there and get to the polls. That's really the name of the game. But we got to remember, this is not about beating the Democrats for its own sake. As much as fun as it will be to beat Kamala Harris and the Democrats on November the 5th, trust me, I'm going to enjoy it more than any person in this room. Why are we trying to beat the Democrats in this election? It's to give the American people the leadership that they deserve. That's what this is ultimately about. I've met a lot of people on the campaign trail in the last few months, and there are a lot of stories that have really stuck with me, but there are a few things that I want to point out to you to try to maybe give you a little bit of a reminder about what we're fighting for here. So I was in Valdosta, Georgia a few weeks ago. It was actually before Hurricane Helene hit, and the hurricane hit Valdosta pretty hard. And I was in what the sheriffs called the interdiction room, where they got all the drugs and all the illegal guns that they had captured from the Mexican drug cartels, and they put it all in this room. And it's, bags upon bags of marijuana. There's illegal guns on the table. There's pills. There's fentanyl. There's meth. There's everything in this room. This small Georgia community overwhelmed with drugs, trafficked, thanks to Kamala Harris's border policies. And I looked on the table. There was something out of place. It was Sour Patch Kids and Nerds candies. I said, what is that? That doesn't look like drugs to me. And the sheriff said, yes, sir, that actually is drugs, because the Mexican drug cartels have figured out that if they disguise the illegal drugs to look like child's candy, they can traffic it into our country much easier. And we all know, especially those of us who are parents and grandparents, know that what's going to happen is one of those packets of candy is going to find its way to a playground in the United States of America. A child is going to open up a piece of candy and pay for that with their life. And that is what Kamala Harris's border policies are doing to this country. I mentioned that my mom struggled with addiction. Well, we got a second chance with my mom, and now I don't go a day without thinking what an incredible grace and what an incredible blessing it was that I got to see my mom become a great-grandmother to our 3 children. But how many, when 100,000 people are dying of drug overdoses in this country every single year, how many American families are getting robbed of their ability to get that second chance with their loved one, with their kid, with their mom or dad? That is what Kamala Harris's open border is doing to this country. I'll tell you about another woman I met. She told me that for 40 years, and this is a retiree, for 40 years, she and her husband did steak night on Friday night. I'm not talking about going to a fancy steakhouse to get a steak. I'm talking about going to the grocery store and grilling out. And we all know that it's those little rituals with our friends and family that actually make life meaningful and worthwhile. These are the things that we look forward to. For 40 years, she had done steak night in good times and bad, and she stopped doing steak night last year because under Kamala Harris's unaffordable groceries, she just could not afford to do steak night with her husband. But she looks forward to getting back to it in slightly better times. We've got our fellow citizens are losing their loved ones to drugs that are coming across the southern border. Our kids are growing up in communities that are less safe. Our retirees are unable to afford family rituals like steak night because of the broken leadership of Kamala Harris. What we get an opportunity in 7 days, my friends, is to give the American people a president who will fix what Kamala Harris has broken. We got 7 days to go. Let's get it done. God bless you guys. Thank you for having me. We'll see you soon.